name is Paige, and I'm here to be the eyes and ears throughout the presentation, navigating any audience questions that arise throughout. But before we kick off the presentation, I want to address a few housekeeping items. First, a reminder that we are recording this webinar, and not to worry, we will share it with everyone here via email after the conclusion of the event. Additionally, should you have any questions for our team throughout the course of the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will attempt to answer all of your questions during our audience Q&A later on. However, if we do not get to your question, we'll do our best to follow up with you after the event. Finally, to get some conversation rolling, please tell us where you're joining from using the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. We'd love to hear where everyone is representing from. Awesome, I love it. With all that being said, I know the reason you're all here today is to hear from the experts on this topic. So I am going to hand the mic over to our host and moderator for today, Robert Lee. Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Paige, and welcome everyone. Thank you from all over the world for joining us. I am super excited today to kick off this webinar, Why Headless WordPress is the Right Choice, by introducing our esteemed speaker, Mr. Sam Toohey. Just a bit of background. Sam is a senior solutions engineer at WP Engine, and he is currently the APAC Headless WordPress subject matter expert, so he's in the know. He's also a maintainer for the themes repository on the WordPress open source project. And as well as that, he's also a colleague and friend of mine. We're very lucky to have him. Today, he's going to show us what Headless WordPress is and why it's gaining popularity, how Headless WordPress solves common challenges in web development, the process of converting a monolithic WordPress site to a headless architecture, real-world applications and benefits for businesses and agencies of all sizes. And we'll cover everything from search functionality improvements to e-commerce integration, authenticated user experiences, and managing those really heavy sites and plugins that you might be working with. Again, just to reiterate what Paige has already said, don't forget, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, so make sure to stick around and put in your questions. And once you do get the recording of this webinar, I highly encourage everyone to share the link with your developer friends, because they'll be really mad if they don't get it after this session. And now, without further ado, over to you, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Long time Gawker, first time speaker. So as mentioned, I'm Sam. I'm one of APAC's headless experts, a senior solutions engineer here at WP Engine, a WordPress developer by trade, and a maintainer of the WordPress core themes as well. So I do some contribution as well. So a bit of a mixed bag in terms of my development experience, but my sort of background is based in headless these days as well. So happy to share some knowledge of some things I've learned along the way, and hopefully you can take something away from the webinar. So let's kick off. First and foremost, what is headless? So in the grand sort of spectrum of things, headless is quite a broad term, but with what we're sort of narrowing it down to and our sort of focus, it is essentially taking a CMS which has a front end sort of capability, in this example, WordPress, stripping it of its front end capabilities, so no need for a theme or anything of that kind, and just relegating it to a back end CMS, which is essentially a data store. And then your front end is paired with a framework of choice. For us, we use Node.js based for our engine. So if you're using a JavaScript based theme, you can use Next.js. You can use the WP Engine framework, Faust, or anything in between, anything with a .js these days. So that's sort of what we're contextually referring to when we look at Headless WordPress. Essentially, Headless WordPress does help you build faster, adhering to architectural best practice with the front-end side, as well as making it more secure as well. And can also be extremely beneficial for makers, publishers, e-com merchants, everyone in the middle of that spectrum. It's a very sort of broad sort of Venn diagram, but anyone in the middle of that as well, to continue to create content, which is fantastic. For those in the room who are WordPress aficionados and probably familiar with how normal traditional WordPress works, This is sort of a bit of an overview in terms of what you would look like on a single tenant sort of WordPress solution. So the WordPress server itself will have your developers and your JavaScript guys or your PHP guys all interacting from a dev standpoint. And then your publishers as well will be interacting with the backend too, all simultaneously on one solution. The end user will see the content either served up by a CDN or not, although these days, most people do use a CDN. And then from there, you have a traditional WordPress site, which everyone's sort of used to, powering 48% of the web. By contrast, this is an example of what a headless sort of diagram would look like. So while the publisher would still interact with the WordPress backend, which they would be familiar with and quite comfortable with in this regard, the developers, like someone like myself, would be using our framework in this hypothetical example, something like Next.js, and we would be interacting with WordPress via the REST API or via WP GraphQL if you have the plugin installed, and using queries and mutations through GraphQL to sort of interact with the backend and get your posts, your queries, anything from the database, and just constructing your components in that fashion. Still the same way, the end user will just look at our front end that we build on Next.js or, your framework in this hypothetical example without needing to see the backend or interact with any backend or anything on the single tenant solution that we showed before, which is, again, a pro point for security. Now, I sort of want to kick off with a bit of an elephant in the room. Full transparency, I love WordPress. It's made my career. I'm a very proud contributor to WordPress as a whole. I would rep that every day. And if I could start my career again, I would probably still choose WordPress. But essentially with growth, especially in APAC, so Australia, Pacific, Asia, there has been a bit of a stagnation in terms of enterprise adoption for WordPress. But WordPress covers nearly 48% of the current modern day web, as we mentioned. In the last 2-3 years or so versus absolute sites, so non-WordPress based sites, it has stagnated in its adoption in Australia. You only really need to look at the current state of the enterprise survey that was released the last year. I think they're still doing the 2024 one. But for 2023, the stat was of the participants that participated in that, 7% of those individuals were in APAC, and of which those 7% were using WordPress, which when you sort of extrapolate that out, that is a significant amount of market share that we could still use to appeal to wider enterprise grade agencies or enterprise businesses themselves to look at and adopting WordPress versus other more legacy sort of systems. WordPress itself has had a little bit of a rough sort of standing in the enterprise space from my experience and conversations with end customers of WP Engine and others outside of WP Engine. Either a lack of suitability to a corporate need, which I think is from a general misconception about the platform, or scaling issues, or any previous grievances from the last couple of years and even pre-Gutenberg. They've just stuck around and they haven't either tried it in the modern day or they haven't had an agency sort of introduce them. They're very set in their ways. And keep in mind, when we do look at moving an enterprise sort of entity over to a new CMS like WordPress, if anyone has ever worked with a government or an educational bureau in the room, it is a slow moving freight train. But once it gets going, it's, you can adopt it and it's easy to do once you educate that entity, but it is quite slow to adopt. So that hesitance in adoption has been something that we do face. If we do directly look at CMS competitors like Sanity, Storyblock, Contentful, who have driven the space forward in that headless CMS or backend sort of CMS only sort of space, WordPress has been slow to adopt to the modern Jamstack tools and capabilities up until around that 2019, 2020 sort of space, where we saw things like WP GraphQL, larger sort of entities and sites actually adopting headless in their practices and actually deploying sites headlessly as well, and slowly ramping up that market share overall. Appealing to enterprise and high spend entities, you can still utilize core WordPress and a lot of the core technologies, blocks, and features, especially Gutenberg as well, When we look at the right add-ons for cross-compatibility with blocks and components, WP Engine, as well as a number of other open source contributors on GitHub, have found routes to be able to make Gutenberg blocks and ACF fields all exposable and compatible to create components for your front end. So you can still use all the things you've built if you are building a block theme these days as well, which I would thoroughly recommend if you are still on the monolithic space. You can use that work and that experience and translate that into Headless WordPress, which does help with the adoption, the user-friendly and tutorial-dense environment that is WordPress versus that more older legacy style enterprise-grade software. You can generally attract more developers from different spaces as well and different technical walks of life for your organization. And if you do teach them CMS like WordPress or the like over their competitors, like Contentful, like I mentioned before, as an example, they themselves will grow and learn. But these days, when we look at the current version of WordPress, React 18.3 was recently enabled in the current version as well. So for those who don't know, you can actually build React components right now inside of WordPress itself. So dynamic blocks, the interactivity API, and custom plugins all can use React. So there is also a cross-skilling capability there as well. If you are looking to get your feet wet with Headless WordPress and dive into these React-based frameworks or even non-React ones like Vue or Angular, there is a core skill set that you can actually move on from building monolithic WordPress sites and then using it to appeal to the headless ones, which can help if you are trying to attract that enterprise appeal. We have found that in that side of space, using the term composable WordPress is a more of a appeal to those enterprise customers due to the vernacular sort of change. It makes WordPress seem flexible as well as extendable to what you want it to do, rather than being rigid and having to only use PHP-based themes. You can actually enhance on the current WordPress experience and make it faster, secure, more developer-friendly, or interact better with current CI/CD techniques. It does appeal to those wider organizations as a whole, from my experience as well. So that's a free little term you can start using as well. So for the wider sort of WordPress appeal, we've spoken about using headless if an enterprise sort of space right now. But when you look at headless in the context of a rebuild or pitching an upgrade or revamping an existing WordPress site, more often than not, using headless in the actual pitch itself, it doesn't really come across as an option unless potentially your client mentions it, or you are predominantly an agency that is a Node.js or JavaScript first sort of agency, whichever you want to regard yourself as, and you would pick your CMS versus, you pick your front-end framework. For a WordPress-centric agency, you would pick a front-end to choose rather than, I want to pitch my client, where we use Next.js, we want to build with Contentful, or we want to build with Sanity, we want to build with WordPress, right? So this sort of appeals to both sides of the equation. Trickling down to both agency and enterprise, these next slides will sort of be appealable to everyone, which is great. And what are we going to do? We're going to break down a site together. We get to do the fun part. What we are going to do is we're going to sort of look at a theoretical site in this example. It is query dense. It has ecom functionality, some heavier plugins on the WordPress side, and currently using a lot of PHP and SQL usage. And that alone, for the directors or the business owners in the room, you can probably imagine your hosting provider's account manager calling you right now, trying to get you on hold about your usage, and you're dodging calls left and right, trying to think of a solution to solve this problem. Well, this should be a solution that you can probably consider. First and foremost, let's break down search functionality limitations with monolithic sites, and then we convert them to headless for our theoretical client. The built-in WordPress search serves a powerful and key purpose in a lot of site types. So e-commerce and WooCommerce is a fantastic combination with WordPress. Yes, WordPress wasn't originally conceived to be an e-commerce platform. You would also argue it was never conceived to be a LMS with LearnDash as well. But over time, these extra sort of built-on services have enhanced WordPress to be something far more capable than what it was in the original conception back in the early aughts, and now is, fairly robust in terms of its offering and that flexibility. These existing plugins for search expand on the default WordPress search protocol, but they rely on the core technology built in to handle that search. So filtering, indexing your content across your database tables might seem like a trivial task, but if you scale that out to hundreds or thousands of users in terms of just bulk requests across a month, or if you look at high levels of concurrency and attempting to achieve something with, I say, a drop mechanic based e-com store or multi-merchant based e-com store, you are suddenly appealing to a significantly wider audience, and search might very well be one of the bottlenecks you find in your performance of your stack overall. We generally want to sort of avoid inefficient requests to the database, but we still need to search that data overall. So how do we look at solving this problem? Well, there are some solutions. Anyone who's a customer of WP Engine in the room will be familiar with our e-commerce offering, but for those who aren't in the room, probably more familiar with things like Algolia, Elastipress, or other search tools baked into other CMSs that might achieve similar sort of fashions like Smart Search, right? First off, we will touch on the Algolia route with Headless WordPress specifically. Algolia is an excellent option. It's quite easy to use. It's powerful and provides real-time indexing, type tolerance, and relevance scoring. It integrates with headless setups quite easily, and there are plugins that are baked in to WordPress that you can also use on your front end to marry the two together to sort of work more seamlessly with search. It also does indexing for your WordPress content and your post types and custom ones as well, and the backend via either the REST API or WP GraphQL. Offering advanced features like autocomplete, faceted search, personalized search. If you see any sort of marketing for the smart search where you type in a query like a t-shirt and then it auto populates that list, that's the sort of experience folks will want to come to expect these days from modern merchants who want to appeal to wider audiences and have modern sort of looking stores, whether you be on WooCommerce, you be on Shopify, anything like that. That is the experience that users like myself come to expect. When I go to the JB Hi-Fi website and I search for my next computer purchase, I want to see that pre-population come down. I wouldn't be amiss if I mentioned the WP Engine Smart Search capability. Our Smart Search technology leverages Elastipress for fast and accurate search results. It works with traditional WordPress, but also with Headless as well and multi-sites. It also indexes the content within WordPress. So any custom post types, the metadata, anything in the database essentially that you can index, it shall do. And it offers advanced features like fuzzy matching, relevant scoring, and faceted search, same as Algolia. So you can kind of see a consistency here between a lot of external search tools. We're looking at everything sort of does the same sort of job. So if you want to be able to pick your poison, there are flexibility in that. So you don't really have to be baked into one specific vendor's technology. You can use open and more approachable technologies like Algolia or Elastipress on its own, or use our technology if you are a customer of WP Engine, and you're welcome to engage our support team or our documentation from our developer relations team on how to get this implemented and be used in your own projects. Issue number 2, e-commerce integration challenges. Full context in the room, WooCommerce is great. We can make it greater. WooCom is very well integrated across WordPress as the nature of how most WooCommerce stores are ran. They are awesome candidates for conversion to Headless. Most store owners who are either plugin dense, even running lean, well-presented sites, or just a mix of the two, they are good candidates to offer for Headless WordPress as conversion because of how fast taking a front-end framework can be, something like Next.js and using something like incremental static regeneration, or even just a server-side rendered approach within Next.js, and pairing that up with WordPress. You can query your WooCommerce product data and do the entire stack headlessly, and suddenly they find they go from maybe a B on a page speed test to an A because of just pure speed benefits of using these modern JavaScript frameworks. Sadly, though, it is commonplace that a lot of e-com stores can be overbloated. That's more often than not what you see in the spectrum of space of sites, be it based in Asia or internationally. It doesn't really matter. They have slow backends or a myriad of other issues where if you're trying to import content via a CSV, maybe WooCommerce is set up as the point of truth. There's no inventory management or a mix of a number of reasons that why that backend might be slow. You know, us in the development space or sitting in the room trying to think about how to optimize these things, we come across a myriad of ways why the product template's not loading, or why the product import is slow, why orders are being held up, or name a problem. You've probably experienced it. There's probably enough experienced individuals in this webinar that have come across one or two e-commerce issues based with WooCommerce, Shopify, Magento, you name it, and can probably pull a name out of a hat and say, hey, this is a problem we've all experienced, and we can all raise our hand and say, I would petition, like I said, these sort of sites are your ideal candidates for headless sites for the business owners in the room or the marketers. If you are looking at creating, a tender or a petition to be able to say, hey, my existing client, this is what you want to do. You're doing a content review after 12 months with the company or 2 years after with the company. What can we do to make it faster? You can maybe start bringing this up in conversation and say, hey, we're doing this stuff internally. We would like to look at maybe considering a rebuild. Would you consider Headless WordPress? You've got an event coming up soon. You need to have high levels of concurrency. Let's look at going a headless front end just to help with that concurrency rather than scaling up on your server solution. You can do a bit more for the front end rather than having to pay more for the overall hosting provider. Cacheable front ends, like I said, incremental static regeneration, server-side rendered approaches, now being, or specifically, I should say, incremental static regeneration, now being available just outside of the cell as well too, is a good mix of server-side and cacheability sort of approaches with building a front end. And using a mix of Apollo and GraphQL for your query structuring, you can create some fairly powerful, scalable front ends that have a really large impact on not only the speed of the site, but don't forget the end user experience as well. For those of us in this space that are front end preferential, our core reason for building what we do is accessibility and user experience. This sort of approach with Headless ticks a lot of those boxes and can help you sleep well at night. Right. In this approach, we will be leaning heavily on querying all our data from the WordPress server via the REST API or WP GraphQL, like I said. Either or works fine. For a lot of the old guards in the space and the more veteran WordPress developers, you will probably want to start experimenting with the REST API. Not saying you're not welcome to use GraphQL by all means. I would recommend you at least check it out. But for those on the call who are perhaps wanting to pivot into using Headless WordPress as a CMS and coming from something like Contentful, you are probably more familiar with something like GraphQL out of the box, and you are welcome to use that as well too, because it's probably more familiar to you, especially for those who have done a Gatsby migration away. Rest in peace, Gatsby. Gatsby had GraphQL built into it as a framework, so you can probably experience me using that as well, which is great. With either of these technologies, we can fetch the product data, orders, we can handle payments, we can do anything you can do on a normal front end with a normal stock WordPress theme, you can do with the correct implementation of an API call. We can also leverage any existing WordPress content or data that might be relevant. So there's no real need to reinvent the wheel. You just have to build your front end and then essentially treat WordPress, like we've said, as a backend separate CMS. You are just querying for data. If you've used anything like Keystone.js in the room, for those, I know it's a niche sort of ecom provider, but or anything that is a Node.js based backend that is specific for ecom or just a data store, you are more than likely familiar with this sort of methodology. And we can still increment critical ecom features like the shopping cart, a solid checkout experience, order management, all in the front end seamlessly, which is great for ensuring compatibility with the existing site and making sure, again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Let's remember the dry philosophy for all the older coders in the room. But we really don't want to blow out our development budget doing this rebuild as well. Let's keep it simple. Lastly, moving to a decoupled model, there's a few things I do want to call out when we are looking at e-commerce as well. There are some benefits if you want to think outside the box. So, for example, you can actually integrate external e-commerce platforms with Headless WordPress, things like Shopify or BigCommerce too, allowing you to appeal to a wider customer base. Specifically, just picking on Shopify for a minute, the storefront API is fairly straightforward to set up. So if you want to integrate, say, a customer has a store on WooCom and on Shopify, and you want to embed something on a WordPress sort of front end as well with web data and WordPress, and then you have your Next.js sort of approach. You can use multiple decoupled distributed backends. You don't have to have WordPress as the core sole end backend. You can have data in multiple locations. And using headless friendly APIs that really help for the product fetching, or just headless friendly approaches to handle transactions or anything, again, like Keystone.js as an example, that has Stripe as a backbone. You can use that to handle your payment platform or anything really that you're commonly familiar with from a merchant side. So there is no real reason to roll your own payment process or roll your own XYZ. You can just integrate all this stuff natively, which is, again, easier than having to do it all yourself. There are some cons. Probably you're thinking you're paying for a backend, you're paying for a front end, paying for Shopify, right? Or Magento or whatever. Yes, there is a cost higher, but I want to mention this because WP Engine has some blueprints, some Kickstarters on our platform. If you look at our Headless WordPress sandbox, you will find, or use local as well too at localwp.com. We have blueprints for Shopify, and you can connect a storefront API and it can pull in merchant data from Shopify. We have approaches for you to do that cross-platform compatibility. Why? Not every agency or developer out there is solely based on WordPress. You might have a couple customers that just chose to use Shopify, but they stay with you as an agency because you're friendly, you are good at what you do, you have great developers, you price well, insert reason here. We want to make sure that when we're looking at approaches to decoupled models, you can think outside the box and you can be supported as you approach those customers to do so. Issue number 3, handling authenticated user experiences. Right. Authenticated user experiences in a headless setup can be slightly challenging, depending on your setup. I will be the first to admit that there are easier routes to do authentication with a non-WordPress based CMS in the past. Nowadays, that complexity has dropped a lot. Authenticated user experiences now can be used with things like JWT, WP GraphQL, or frameworks like Fast.js as well, have their own sort of technology baked into them, and I'll get into that into a sec. Traditional WordPress authentication systems are designed to be expanded on by existing plugins, and they will come across a need eventually in your projects to implement a secure authentication system that works seamlessly with decoupled front ends. So keep in mind, this is probably something you might come across. We do need to ensure that user data is properly fetched in this sort of hypothetical approach, displayed across the front end, and then making sure that that data is unique to that end user. It's sanitized, it's not exposed in any way, so someone can't fetch it or do any man in the middle nastiness. And there's also scalability and caching considerations to take into account. Keep in mind with WordPress, as soon as you sign into a WordPress site, all that behavior is dynamic. So how can we sort of handle this replication on our front end, keeping in mind the potential performance constraints? The preferred route, like I said, is Fast.js. By no means are you beholden to using this. This is all open source as well for Fast, and you can grab this on our developer documentation on our website. But Fast has authentication handlers built in to do either local or server-side sessions for handling authentication. You can white label it as a custom self approach, so the user doesn't even need to see the WordPress admin page, and then they just get redirected back to the front end or their login page. To once you have confirmed their login token, they are back to their membership or personalized profile page. All done and dusted, really seamless and quick and easy to do. You can also customize the login logic with Apollo client, or disabling the authentication link chain using WordPress hooks. So there are different ways to be able to approach this. Fran Agulto, actually on our DevRel team, has a number of tutorials on our blog on how to leverage this technology specifically, and they're quite good, as well as on the WP Builders YouTube channel. I would recommend you checking those out if you are curious. He's a very smart individual, much smarter than I, and knows his stuff, especially when it comes to authentication as well too. Runner up as well, I guess, is the honorable mention. the participation trophy, if we don't want to be framework locked in or vendor locked in specifically with our stuff, even though what we offer is open source, a more universal approach to handling authentication is something I've been playing around with recently, is using JSON Web Tokens and GraphQL just to handle the authentication state. And it's actually quite interesting when you look at it. There's some cool routes to explore as well next door to implementing it as well, because Next.js is the big hotness right now. A lot of people are probably using it. So you can build some fairly cool options for things like a membership site or a subscription site or anything really needing just that wider authentication. This sort of universal method is also great to use too. Last issue before we get into the next section, handling resource-heavy plugins. This is probably a larger sort of elephant in the room for the WordPress folks on the call. Resource-heavy sites are a great opportunity. It is the last bit of the pie in our theoretical example, but whole point of converting monolithic or traditional, whichever term you want to use, WordPress sites is to make them less bloated, more performant, more scalable, and mix in a couple new bits and pieces of either new technology you're learning to work with, like something like a front-end framework, or lower the overall admin Ajax or just Ajax hook usage, or just remove certain dynamic plugins as well, either or. Plugins that heavily rely on Ajax calls to push and pull requests from the front end through Apache can't generally get a cached effectively because it compromises that data. A great example is like certain events calendar plugins as well. All that data is fairly unique and dynamic and are challenging to migrate to a headless architecture. And frankly, to be fair, it might be easier to rebuild that specific component rather than forcing a WordPress plugin to be used for a headless sense. And that's another probably elephant in the room as well. Not all plugins will work well with headless, but as long as you can query some data of some fashion, you can actually make it work. The REST API is more widely adoptable with a lot of plugins these days than GraphQL, but GraphQL, WP GraphQL specifically, and that implementation has had a growing amount of plugins adopt its usage as well too. So you might find back now, if you had a look earlier in a couple of years ago compared to now, you will find a lot more plugins are flexible to use with Headless WordPress, which is great. So when we perform a successful functionality swap, we want to look at replacing plugins with alternative solutions that offer headless-friendly APIs. In our calendar example, you would use something like Eventbrite Full Calendar as an example. They just are generally the best approach. They can integrate well and then store that data either on their server, or if you can get it to store on WordPress, again, you can use WordPress like a super base, essentially a data store as well too. Ideally, in this process, we want to evaluate plugin functionality, determine if it can be replicated using the REST API or WP GraphQL, and then roll our own solution or find an external solution that is more a universal best fit. One thing I would note here as well is you can explore using ACF or advanced custom fields that has a lot of potential to perform a lot of these functionality swaps, and where you might find yourself sort of backed into a corner. A lot of the existing tools that we use every day with WordPress can also be used in different sort of routes outside the box as well too. More than just a proof of concept, it can be used in the wild and in production. All right, the hard part's over. Backend's done. Let's look at making this a repeatable tool set, right? We're looking at the front end now. Right, when we look at getting this going, it might have a slightly higher difficulty curve. I will admit, headless, a lot of folks, if you look on Twitter, or if you have a look at anything that I've either written or worked on, if you're a WP Engine customer, you might have met me or spoken to me if you've done anything to do with Headless WordPress. There is a difficulty curve in adopting it. It is a technology change. Like I said at the start, React might have slowly been introduced into Gutenberg and the block editor over time to be used in current day WordPress, but there's still a lot of hesitation in adopting that. And a lot of folks are still using the classic editor and other different types of themes. So that hurdle has to be tackled as well. When we want to look at something like getting started with this, there are ways to get going more simplistically, as well as taking a best practice from the outside the WordPress space and then implementing it into your own when you are looking at converting to headless. So what do I mean by this? We start using a component library to draw out reusable components. We explore server-side calls, and we get deep into using something like Apollo to really find yourself flying through client proposals, test builds, and just following different best practices that you might not be used to or not exposed to because you're not building with Headless yet, or you've tried and you want to try something else. There will be more complex sites, but if you look at monolithic conversions for brochureware to start, all the e-com sites, like we mentioned, smaller e-com stuff, smaller membership sites to kind of get your feet wet, you will compete, helping them compete better with the bigger players, since they're so much faster now compared to the other folks who might be running WordPress and they're larger and have bigger budgets and might not need as much front-end editing and just small content adjustments. That might also be a better start for you if you want to sort of look at something easy and low-hanging fruit. Your first X numbers of headless customers will be the hardest, but how do I get a theme that's going, that is quite scalable and easy to use? For me personally, I have a few key tenets I've followed with my own sort of builds and things outside of WP Engine. Reusable CSS modules or style components, I guess, is a great way to start. Tailwind is also a good framework to sort of get going with. And those who aren't a fan of the whole inline styling thing, I guess you can use reusable CSS modules. But React components and then things like incremental static regeneration are good technologies to look at now. They are more and more getting adopted widely and are slowly becoming best practice, and are helping to create a good mix of cacheable websites with more server-side based components that call data when the event fires. So this sort of building block you can build out, just think of building the Lego Death Star, right? You're following the instructions, and from start to finish, we are slowly building out these components. Then we break it, and then we're going to build it again and again and again. And you're going to get faster every time, depending on the client. But having a blueprint to start with is kind of key. And when we look at building our component library or our hypothetical theme in this regard to kind of use for our headless pitches, our headless tenders, building your own component library is kind of important, I would say, especially if you want to be doing this over and over and over and over again. This will allow you to sort of rapidly prototype and build a proof of concept for a tender, or develop most of the front-end components you've already got. You can get most of 70 or 80% of your build completed if you have an in-house sort of template that you've got a back-end tested against and all these sorts of things, and just handle the last maybe 15, 20% of those more bespoke parts for the end customer, and then just do styling. So you are slowly incrementing on your build time, which is great. Putting it simply, this will allow you to sort of look at your development hours and your proposal and achieve something with faster timelines than previous clients, or allows for more extensive customization if you are looking at those larger sort of scale, bigger enterprise projects that we mentioned at the top. Our templates and blueprints can help with this, but they are also just a kickoff point. You can more than welcome to sort of remodel and take a lot of what we've done. We have a component library built into a lot of our components, built into our themes, and they're all built and ready to go. You're welcome to just use that as a kickoff point, or you can use it as inspiration to build your own. Whatever component you can think of can be reusable essentially and can be done later within reason. And like I said, you can get about 80% of the way done with your own internal theme. And most of the WordPress folks in the room will probably have experience building their own template or their own blueprint or their own block theme if you're building block themes, and have that sort of starter patterns, those template parts, all that really done and ready to go. And then when you do get a new client, you just roll out your theme and then customize those patterns and templates. Same approach applies to Headless WordPress. And you can kind of see that's the way WordPress development is sort of going. Customizable patterns, customizable templates, customizable components, flexible components. It's all sort of coming into harmonizing in the middle. Some commercially available solutions, I will say, might not be a best fit in general. They have their own bloat, and they might be more time consuming to adapt to your need. Just keep that in mind. Right. We're about now 40 minutes in. We've covered a lot here, I know. An executive summary is available on this QR code, as well as when you get the email with the recording. I'm also available if you have any questions, either online or via email. Again, I kind of hope you've enjoyed sort of this run through of Headless broadly. This is more of a 101, sort of 102 class, I will say, if you're familiar with university. I'm more than happy to sort of break down and deep dive into more complex components and more one-on-one sessions as well. I really do enjoy getting into the nerdy weeds and sort of helping folks look at consulting and building out what could be a potential project for Headless, be it with us at WP Engine or someone else. It's kind of why I'm here. But I will say a quick note, this is my way of approaching doing this in this slide. I try to follow best practices. I am by no means that 10x developer. I'm not a Primeagen or a Theo. I am just a guy that's really interested in building stuff. And your approach will differ to this, but hopefully we can either meet somewhere in the middle, or if you have feedback or anything on this session or anything we do here at WP Engine, we are welcome to it and happy to have the conversation. I will now pass over to questions and answers.
Thank you, Sam. Virtual clap from everyone. That was very, very informative. So that wraps up the main part of our webinar. And I've got to say, pretty valuable content, jam-packed, and I'm sure there's a lot to digest. We're now up to obviously our Q&A part of the webinar, and this is where things get really interesting. Paige has been helping us by keeping an eye on the questions that you've put down in chat or in the Q&A feature. So thank you for those who put those questions in, and we'll start with those, given that they're sort of top of mind right now. So, Sam, our very first question, lucky number one, it's kind of a compound question. We have a couple of attendees who have been doing a few headless projects. They've mainly used AWS in the past, and they want to know, how does WP Engine help with this setup or help navigate that setup?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So I guess one of the things we looked at when we looked at pivoting and building a headless product to start with was a unified experience. So one provider that can help you with everything, be it support or be it hosting the web app as well as the backend, or just unified billing, right? So we assist in a capacity where we follow a lot of the similar sort of deployment practices. If you're familiar with Vercel or Railway or Netlify, our front end system works very much in the same way. So there's familiarity with configuring environment variables or using Git to deploy, or connecting GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab to deploy your code. But then as well, we can host that WordPress side for you. We are one of the leading WordPress hosting companies, so we have a myriad of experience on the WordPress side as well. But we have a lot of experience in general on the headless side from individuals like myself, as well as folks on my team and around it that are here to essentially provide a pre-sale sort of consultative experience, as well as some post-sale support and assistance in terms of following best practices, or maybe you're having issues deploying, or you need sort of connection with our engineering team if you have a more complex sort of question. That's kind of what we're here for. You can think of us as like the consigliere to the Don, if you want to use a Godfather sort of terminology or analogy. We are there in the corner, here to help you when you need it. But for the most part, if you're capable of running it on your own, we are also there as a support vector as well too. So unified billing, support, helping you scale, customer service representatives as well to help sort of your account grow too as a business. We try to cover all avenues in that regard.
Awesome. I love your way with analogies. So the next question we have, Sam, and this one's a little bit more technology related. What would be the recommendation for a front-end technology from WP Engine to keep it simple and to get started?
Cool. Good question. I would personally say Next.js. We have our own framework, Fast.js, and it is also built off Next. So it is kind of like Next with a bunch of WordPress helpers baked into it. And it is fantastic at what it does. And it is very much documentation developer focused. It is well documented. We have a whole headless community as well on Discord. We have DevRel guys that can help you with it. It's a fantastic tool. But if you look at the wider sort of landscape of developers right now using what specific frameworks they're using, it's like the iPhone versus Android debate, right? If you're going to give your 50 or 60-year-old mother something to communicate with while you go overseas, you're probably going to give her an iPhone. if in this case, if you want something that's well documented and a lot of people are using, and you want maybe a support experience that maybe we might not have the answer to, or just something on Stack Overflow, or even something the AI tools might be able to answer for you specifically, because there's a lot of information out there, Next.js would be the one to choose for that. It does support incremental static regeneration, obviously, because Vercel pioneered that. But our hosting stack does provide that too. So if you are wanting to use Next.js and use the app router with ISR, that will run on WP Engine. We are framework agnostic, and we do not force you to use any of our specific technology. You can use anything that runs on Node.js here. So if you want to learn Next.js, or anyone that might have followed a coding tutorial or anything like that, you will probably be better off to start with Next.js, but you are welcome to check out Fast as well. That's open source, and a lot of the code and components in that can now also be rolled into your own implementation with some work on your end as well.
Awesome answer. Thank you, Sam. And thank you for, encouraging everyone to just chat GPT it. Our next question, or Claude, yes. Our next question is actually in regards to something that's a little bit more WordPress specific.
Cool.
Oh, Robert, I think you might have muted yourself.
Yeah, I think I just there we go. I thought I lost audio there for a minute.
That's my bad.
Okay.
So starting again with that question, it's a little bit more WordPress specific, and it's around can headless work with the Divi theme? And a bonus follow-up question is, if so, how many dev hours do you approximately think it would need if we're not thinking about e-commerce and just blogs and pages?
That is a great question. And I actually get asked this question a lot. And shameless plug, I actually wrote something about this a little while ago about using page builders with headless. The answer is no, specifically because if you think about how Divi, I guess we'll lump Elementor into this as well. If you think about how a page builder works and how headless is meant to work, headless is designed to interact with WordPress purely through an API tunnel, right? You've got one end of the tunnel and the other end, and the queries and the information passes between the two. Divi and Elementor don't have that direct capacity. They are designed to work within the constraints of a single WordPress theme. You install Divi as the theme, or you install, let's say, Hello Elementor, or whatever you want to use with Elementor, and it will build off of the default WordPress experience, right? So when you try to run that with headless, it won't see anything. Headless, you connect it with Node.js and the like, Next.js and the like, and let's say you've got that up and running, it won't see anything. If you click on post and click preview, you'll just see a Divi theme. So unfortunately, it doesn't work, which is kind of why I went across the whole composable, reusable component argument in the first place. You can build a lot of those same sort of blocks like what you get from Divi and Elementor on your own with a little bit of hours. And to sort of answer that dev hours approximation, that itself is how long is a piece of string, to use a well-used cliche. It depends on the project. I myself, the things I've worked on, either as one person or with a couple of others, I would average, I'd say maybe 30, 40 hours. Larger projects, more time, but more people, many hands make light work, as the saying goes. It also depends on your familiarity with the framework, which is kind of why, if we look back at question 2, why I said using Next.js. If you want to look at sort of lowering your development hours, and like I said in the earlier slides, your first client or first 2 couple of clients will probably be the slowest and the hardest. But once you get that ball rolling, you'll be firing on all cylinders and really get the ball down.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Sam. We do have a few more questions. And so the next one, we're getting into, say, WordPress and static site generation. The question is, do we need to use a webhook plugin in WordPress to trigger the build in Next.js for static site generation, or SSG approach?
No, I've not used that personally. In my approaches to using Next.js, when you build something specifically to be static, you would follow the current documentation for building something that is client-side rendered and has a build process. And whatever content you would pull from WordPress, let's say a blog or the like, is just rendered at build time. The build server, in our case, our front-end system, will do that for you and communicate with WordPress. So it will run the necessary triggers and pull all the content that's appropriate at build time versus needing to use a specific webhook. I admit that's probably something I've not tried, but I've done it a different way. Like I said, I've just followed the best practices in terms of following that. The same goes with static such with the server-side rendered approach too. That content will be called via your API when it is ready to be ran and called. Essentially, it shouldn't necessarily need a webhook as such. Like if your question maybe relates to something like Gravity Forms, for example, if you're using their webhook for whatever reason, you're using a form or something like that, it would not be waiting for that trigger. You would have built that in with using the existing tools for something client-side, like the Next.js sort of client-side rendering methodology, and your build server like us, Vercel, Netlify.
Thank you for that answer, Sam. Moving along to the next one, we've got a lot of them coming in. So thank you, everyone. If we don't get through to all of them, we'll try to get to you back later. But the next question that we do have, and this is sort of a pain point that's pretty common with WordPress sites, and that is, how do you deal with WordPress's built-in features like a preview page or previewing a post?
Great question. Fun fact, Fast.js solves that for you. So we actually have the add-ons open source and ready to go to handle content previews. So whether you use Fast as an entire framework, or you just cherry pick bits and pieces and sort of re-engineer it to your own use case for something, if you want to combine Next.js with the like, Fast has a content preview system baked into it. And if you use any of our blueprints, they are built with Fast. So if you go to, I think we've got a portfolio blueprint as an example, which has a couple of blog posts and such in it. If you click preview in the WP admin on the blog post, there's no theme installed. The Fast plugin actually gives you an option to disable the entire customizer as well. So the end user, let's say a content marketer or the like, can't actually even see the customizer tab too in the appearance overview. And you can see your content that you've written as a preview on the front end theme that you've built. And there's a few basic steps to follow along with that. But I would recommend checking out our documentation on that. It's actually one of the main benefits of sort of creating that consistency between converting from a monolithic theme to something that's more composable. And I recommend it. It helps a lot, especially with publishers and the like, if you're using content heavy sites.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Sam. I know a lot of people have had to deal with that in the past. So next question, and this kind of, we're flipping subjects a little bit here, and it's kind of one of my favorite subjects. We're going to be talking about security. The question was, if we're using Headless WordPress, do we still use security plugins like WordFence?
Look, that's up to you. Generally, no. When you think about what Headless looks like, if we go back to our infrastructure diagram that we saw earlier at the start of the session, you have a server here running your WordPress instance and a server here running your front end, right? It's completely separate from each other. And the fact that you can push security patches or anything that might have accidentally exposed maybe an environment variable or anything like that to your front end quite quickly with a Git deploy, that's fairly uncommon in the way of how we do things now with WordPress. Like we have to wait for a plugin vendor to patch a vulnerability. If you've incidentally done that yourself on the front end, you can fix that. You are welcome to use WordPress, WordFence, excuse me. But in my experience, the way the firewall works with that, it might sort of slow down your query response time, and there's not really a need in order to run it. I would more invest in a reliable WordPress host that has things like a WAF or throwing your backend via behind Cloudflare or anything like that to have that sort of layer 3 level sort of security at the domain level before the query even hits the back end versus needing something at the application level on WordPress.
Okay, thank you for answering that, Sam. Of course, security is a big thing, that's kind of one thing that Headless can solve for. So the next question, I'm going to surface this up because a few people have actually asked a similar sort of question. And
Sure.
that is around forms. So
Yep.
the question kind of aggregated is, what do you recommend, or how do you recommend handling forms using a headless WordPress setup?
Good question. So I mentioned Gravity Forms before with the webhooks, only because I'm working on something outside of WP Engine that involves Gravity Forms on a monolithic site. So that's the first thing that came to mind. But within the scope of a headless conversation, I would personally use something like ACF and build a form, right? So I've built some proof of concepts that email out from a basic inquiry that I've built with an ACF, a couple of ACF custom fields and some post types. And it's just sends my data and emails it to me from the front end. It hooks into WP Mail. It does everything as you normally would expect and just handles that and does it fairly straightforward. Most plugins you will find that use forms of any description, like Contact Form 7, WP Forms, Gravity Forms, they're all built to be used within WordPress. So you can't technically embed them on your front end unless you convert the form to HTML and then build it within a JSX component, I guess. But ideally, you're not really building a Gravity form to be used on a headless side. And when with your auth as well, once that user session is authenticated, honestly, you should be fine using any of the SMTP setup within the front end, or even using on the back end. That's the beauty of headless. You can choose where that stuff sends from. Most folks choose WordPress, but for the back end side to send from, but you can do either or.
Love the flexibility that obviously Headless can provide. Now we are running up to the end of the webinar. We've got a few minutes left. And so I'm going to give you one last question. And this one is a bit of a curly one. But this is in relation to handling localization or a geo-distributed sort of website. So could you explain how you might handle having sort of a multi-regional front end that might fetch regionally specific content, for example, localized or multilingual content?
Okay. You love leaving the hard questions for last. Thank you, everyone.
Definitely. I love it.
So in this case, this is a bit of a throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just throwing everything that I can think of at the solution, right? So in this scenario, I've worked on something with a WP Engine customer where, because multi-sites are a possibility, we're using them with headless. What I would do in this scenario is I would use something like Vercel, or it depends on the context. In this case, I'm hoping it's cacheable. I'm going to say, to make this question easier for myself, I'm going to hope most of that front end is cacheable. And what we're going to do is I would get your data center to as close as where you would say that the majority of your inquiries are going to originate from. And then you will use your front end to build, let's say, a normal cacheable general site. WPML actually has an integration that works with GraphQL. So you can actually fetch all the multilingual stuff within WPML natively. So it works out of the box. And then from there, within your multi-site, you would have that separate for each individual region, staggered all the way through each specific subsite. And then your multiple front ends will query the multiple subsites. So let's say you have one for Australia, one for Singapore, one for India, and go from there. And you can build that appropriately. Or alternatively, you can just have the one front end and it does the same region detection and will change language appropriately depending on your region, all from WPML and just a GraphQL query. It's pretty handy. And that's another thing that I mentioned before when I said about plugin compatibility with GraphQL over the years. Because of the adoption and sort of the experience a lot of entities are gaining with headless nowadays, a lot of the big players in the plugin space are either making their stuff compatible with WP GraphQL or have done so already. So when you are doing conversions or straight out builds, like a multi-regional, multi-language sort of build out, you will find that user experience and developer experience far more straightforward than what it was, let's say, 4 years ago, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much for that answer, Sam. And thank you all for attending our webinar on why Headless WordPress is the right choice. I know that I found it very valuable. I'm sure you found the insights and expertise valuable as well in understanding the power and potential of Headless WordPress architecture. Thank you all for your engagement and the tons of questions that we got. Remember, you'll be receiving a recording of this webinar soon, so I encourage you to share it with all your developer friends. Again, they might be mad if they don't get it. And from all of us at WP Engine, thank you once again for your time and attention, and we hope you'll join us for future webinars. Have a great rest of the day.